Hello everyone, welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be talking a bit more about landing with FS Tramp. I've had a few requests to do a tutorial on how to land with FS Tramp, and there's two ways of landing with FS Tramp, one for Airbus, one for other planes, and I'm going to touch on them today and what's the best way of doing it. Okay, because I've had, questions, and I think I did one of these a while back, but it's updated now because we know more. So, how do you land with FS Tramp? Well, the most automated way of landing with FS Tramp is in an Airbus on an ILS. An Airbus in general will auto flare. The flare action is usually what you do at about 20 feet. You raise the nose a bit so that you don't smash into the ground, and you bring back the throttles. The Airbuses are probably the most automated. So we all know how we do an approach with FS Tramp. You fly along, say, to the ILS, you switch to M2 when you get the ILS, you hit approach mode, and Tramp, as long as you configure the plane properly, is going to descend. A rule of thumb for all aircraft is, I would say, configure fully by about 2,000 feet. You want flaps out and gear down. And I would take control of the speed from Tramp. What Tramp's going to do with the speed, and it does this in all aircraft, is it's going to reduce the speed and try and reach your target touchdown speed just as you touch down. That's not what you need to do. You need to be at your final approach speed quite a bit before then. So maybe, say something like, 4,000 feet we're going to be 200 knots, 3,000 feet we're going to be 180 knots, 2,500 feet we're going to be 160 knots, 2,000 feet we're going to be 140. Something like that. Just get a little routine together, and as you fly your specific aircraft you'll get used to it more and more, because some aircraft are going to slow down easier than others. But the actual landing part in an Airbus on the ILS, so all you need to do is Tramp will guide it down on the ILS. When you reach 300 feet or so, click the fly plan button and take it out. Reason being, Tramp is always going to take the fly plan and autopilot out at about 200 feet. You don't want it to do that on the ILS because the Airbus is very clever and it can auto land itself. So there is no need for the autopilot to come out. So take fly plan out at 300, not whole autopilot, just fly plan, and that will stop Tramp from interfering. The plane's going to continue down and you don't really need to do anything until about 50 feet. Then turn runway guidance mode on. This is going to put you on TFM's runway guidance mode, so when you touch down, if you start drifting off the heading, you will know. At about 30 feet, take out the auto throttle and retard the throttles, so bring them back. There are some Airbuses that will do that for you automatically, and some of them don't. So it really depends on your plane. You'll have to experiment. But in general, take out the auto throttle and idle it. And the earlier you do that, the better. So about 30 feet, maybe even 40 feet. The Airbus is going to auto flare. So it's going to slowly bring the nose up and touch down. All you need to do then is, provided you've had your auto brake set, it will brake for you as well. Hit reverse thrust, make sure that you are on the center line as you go through about 80-60 knots. Bring the reverse thrust out, and you can take over the braking yourself if you would like. And that's all you need to do. Now, in other planes like Boeings, Embraers, CRJs, all this stuff, they don't auto flare. They don't have that feature. So what you have to do is flare yourself, okay? So it's the same procedure pretty much. You're going to take fly plan out at about 300. 50 feet you're going to turn runway guidance on. 30 feet you're going to take the auto throttle out and idle the power. However, you need to flare. There's two ways of doing this. If you have a joystick, you can pull back on the stick. Don't pull back too much. It's usually going to be very gentle. And it's going to depend on the plane you're in as well. Now, that is not the most reliable way. It is the way they do it in the real world, but of course, because we have no visual guidance of the runway, it's very difficult to do. It is doable though. Give it a shot. But the most reliable way I've found is to use a vertical speed in tramp, right? So you take flight plan out at 300. That means tramp is no longer controlling the plane. The autopilot is still in command and it's just going to continue down to the runway, okay? This is if you've got an ILS. What you're then going to need to do is go to the vertical speed box of tramp. Do this ahead of time, just as soon as you take flight plan out. And go into the vertical speed box. Enter something like -100. Okay, and then as you reach about 50, just maybe as before you turn runway guidance on, hit enter on the vertical speed, the field that you've just put in. So you type it in, leave your cursor there, and then just hit enter when you're at about 50. What that's going to do is send a value to the autopilot of -100, which means the nose is going to rise. So essentially you're auto flaring it kind of, but you're doing it yourself, so it's manually, you're typing it in. You're doing what the auto flare would do. And then you touch down and it was the same procedure. Now, the only other thing for you to consider is, let's say you are on an RNAV approach or something like this and there is no ILS. Well, how do you land then? Same kind of procedure. Again, take flight plan out at 300. You won't have an ILS that continues to guide you down, but tramp will have set some satisfactory values in the autopilot and it will continue on its way down. You might want to consider doing the vertical speed a bit earlier if you have no ILS, just to make sure. So maybe go, if you, it sounds like you're coming down really fast and you are a pro at this, you might be able to put something like -300 in at 100, then -100 in at 50 feet. You see what I'm saying? You're slowly bringing that nose up because there's no ILS to help you out here at all. Another good thing to do if there's no ILS is as soon as you take flight plan out, right, your plane is at risk of rolling to the left or right because there is no ILS to guide it. So hit Control V, and Control V is the wing leveler. That will make sure that you roughly stay on the heading you are on and that you will not drift as much. If you use the runway awareness add-on that I talked about in a previous podcast, then that will greatly help you because you will know when you're on the runway. If you're coming towards the end of the runway, it will tell you need to stop. Don't be alarmed if you're using runway awareness, especially if there's no ILS and it tells you you're too high or something like this. Tramp isn't the best on approaches, but it will get you down. You just have to accept, unfortunately, that if there is no ILS, the landing is probably not going to be anywhere near as good. You might be further off the centre line, you might smash it a bit more. That is to be expected because there is no way of guiding you down. You're kind of just relying on the autopilot and your own skills to do this. Again, runway guidance is your friend with TFM. You can use TFM's attitude mode to show you what the nose is doing in audible indications as well, but that is going to conflict with runway guidance. You can't have them both running at the same time really, so you would have to really choose one or the other, or switch between them, which can be tricky in such a time limited area. So that's how to land with FS Tramp. There's lots of videos of me doing it, and you'll hear that, as always, some landings are better than others, but there's lots of videos of me and others doing it on other channels. And if you have any questions, as always, put them in the comments. I hope this was helpful. That's how we land currently in August 2020.